I would like to welcome all of you to today's session titled, How Does Living with Dementia Affect Your Financial Health? And for those of you who don't know me, my name's Ashton Bateman. I'm a support and education coordinator with the Alzheimer's Society of BC, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's guest presenter. We're very pleased to have Cindy Huang from Leith Wheeler speaking to us today on the topic of how dementia can affect your financial health. So Cindy's been with Leith Wheeler since 2012 and is responsible for managing discretionary investment portfolios for private clients and foundations. Cindy is a graduate of McGill University and a chartered financial analyst who's passionate about providing financial literacy among women and new immigrants, speaking at events for women in capital markets and her dollars and cents.
Thank you so much for having me. We have done some work, Leith Wheeler with Alzheimer's Society. We've partnered together on a few things. So we've had them come in to speak to our staff about working with clients living with dementia. We've also hosted an event for our clients. So it's a pleasure to be here to speak to their audience today. For those of you who do not know Leith Wheeler Investment Counsel, we are a fully independent and employee-owned investment management firm, founded in 1982. So we've been around for over 40 years. So our head office is here in Vancouver, although we have offices as well in Toronto and Calgary, covering the country. We manage about $28 billion in assets for our clients, ranging from institutional clients to foundational clients like the Alzheimer's Society, and then also private clients and their families. So I think for myself, especially working with private clients, we are seeing more and more cases of dementia all the time. It's certainly become more and more topical, I think, as the population has gotten older. So, there's a lot of important considerations to think about as it relates to your financial health. I will preface this to say that this is going to be a little bit higher level today. I'm sure all of you have situations where you have, some examples or stories of family with dementia, and you may have some very specific questions. So I don't want to get into individualized financial advice today. But if you have any questions at all, I'd be happy to speak with you over email or phone. So I know Ashton's going to circulate some helpful resources with my contact details. So we are going to stop at the end of each section. I'm going to address any questions. So feel free to just pop some questions in the chat box there. So with that being said, let's kick it off. So how does living with dementia affect your financial health? So what role does your financial advisor play in protecting your investments? I'm guessing all of you, if you're here today, may be working with a financial advisor. Some of you may be doing it on your own. But a good financial advisor should be able to help you protect you against any threats to your money. Our job is so much more than just, helping you pick stocks and bonds and doing your asset mix. And, I think a big part of our role too is to help you protect your wealth, right? Ultimately. And it's probably important to highlight that not all financial advisors have the fiduciary duty to act in your best interest. So as portfolio managers, we do have that duty to act, honestly in good faith and for your best interest, but that's certainly not the case with all advisors. So just something to be aware of. There are a lot of advisors out there that, are more salespeople, unfortunately. So, but a good financial advisor, and this is what is coming up a lot more now in our industry. It's something called a trusted contact person, or a TCP. So now if you go open an investment account, they'll usually ask you to put a trusted contact person on file. And who is a trusted contact person? Basically just somebody that we can contact in the event that we can't get a hold of you. Perhaps we're worried that, there's some cognitive decline or a risk of you being financially exploited. Mind you, we are not experts in being able to detect cognitive decline or fraud or financial exploitation, or we'd probably be in a different job than we are, but we certainly do try our best to spot some of the signs. And the more information you can give your financial advisor, the more it helps them to be able to do that. Now, we cannot share any of your personal financial information with your trusted contact person. So it's really just like an emergency contact to have on file. The other really important document to provide to your financial advisor is what's called an enduring power of attorney. So this basically allows this individual that you delegate to be able to act as you as it pertains to your legal and financial affairs in the event of your incapacity, right? So it's a very, very powerful document. You want to make sure you delegate the right person. And oftentimes what I see is that people will delegate their children to be their enduring power of attorney. And the difference between an enduring power of attorney and what's more of a general power of attorney is that the enduring power of attorney, is more so for when you lose capacity, right? You can outline exactly how you want it to be set up. You can have it kicking in right away, or you can have it kick in when you do lose capacity. Whereas with a general power of attorney, it's more like, maybe you're out of the country, you need your daughter or son to take care of something for you while you're away. If you do lose capacity, it no longer applies, right? So the enduring power of attorney is really what we're looking for in the event that you're no longer able to manage your investments anymore. This is different from a representation agreement, which you're probably aware of, through Alzheimer's Society, which is more of a medical power of attorney for healthcare decisions. So that's outside of the scope of your finances. So generally, our compliance does say to have a different person for your enduring power of attorney and also your trusted contact person. And the reason being that you don't always, there are definitely cases where the power of attorney is not acting in your best interest, right? So if we have another third party to be able to speak to as the trusted contact to say, hey, this is what's happening, it's a better safeguard, I think, to have a separate trusted contact person. You also want to update your advisor on, not only your trusted contact person, your POA, but also the executor of your will. If you have a trust, who's your trustee? Just having all of this information on file just makes it a lot easier for when that stage does come, where we need to contact these individuals for your investment portfolio. What are some of the risks of transactive memory? So this is certainly not limited to individuals living with dementia. I think we're all kind of guilty of this, right? We keep a lot of information in our heads that we don't always share with our family and loved ones. I think something that I've seen that's been very, very effective is when my clients, especially the elder clients, start bringing in their children to portfolio review meetings, especially as they're approaching that stage where they're saying, okay, there's a chance that I may, lose capacity, or, I don't really even want to be that involved anymore. To be able to involve the next generation or your spouse even in these meetings not only allows an introduction to your advisor so everybody knows each other, but it really helps everybody get in the same game plan, right? So let's say, your objectives with your money is to give some to charity, whatever your intentions are with your money, the more that you can communicate it and involve the people that'll be taking over, the more likely it is that your wishes will be honored, versus somebody who doesn't tell the kids anything and then they pass away and then everybody's in the dark. Nobody knows what your intentions are. And we're going to talk about an estate checklist as well in a bit. Leith Wheeler also has what's called a vulnerable clients policy. I will say that Leith Wheeler does not believe that people living with dementia are vulnerable or incapable in any way. It really applies to a broad range of clients, just clients that are more susceptible to, financial exploitation. So it gives us a bit of a framework, right? In the event that we do have that situation, we know what the firm's policies are on that. So, what are some of the potential warning signs that a client is potentially being financially exploited? And I'm going to go through a list of some of the signs. Now, mind you, it's not unusual to see one of these signs, but when you do start seeing a combination of these signs, then it's definitely more of a red flag. So, things like unexpected withdrawals from the account that are out of the ordinary. Suddenly, the client doesn't want to talk about their financial matters anymore. They're now, here I am telling you to bring your children to it, but or your spouse, but suddenly, some new or unknown caregivers coming to meetings, difficult communicating without involving other people. This is a big one when they want to change ownership of their assets, changing POAs, changing wills, changing beneficiaries. So those are all, individually not a red flag, but maybe together, definitely the advisor should be asking some questions. Inconsistent instructions to the firm as it relates to, withdrawals specifically tend to be more of a red flag. In the event that we do identify, enough red flags to say, okay, now we're a little bit concerned, there may be a chance of exploitation. We may speak to the client directly if they're able, the power of attorney, the trusted contact. And one thing that we can do is actually place a temporary hold on your account. before we proceed, right? And really, it is the client's money, but really, we're just trying to protect you, to determine, what the situation is. And it has definitely happened with myself. So I did have a client who was in her late 80s. She had no family at all. So she had no husband, no children, no family in Canada. She had a massive investment portfolio. I wouldn't say investment portfolio was pretty large, but she had a lot of commercial real estate. She had a lot of, real estate assets as well. And we're talking, over $10 million of assets. And initially, we knew who her POAs were, who her beneficiaries were. There were two friends of hers. And then all of a sudden, she had developed dementia. And all of a sudden new people started coming out of the woodwork, right? Her new friends, her new neighbors, and they were now, putting claims on the money. So, you know we had to, in that situation, actually put a temporary hold on the account. We don't know what the truth is, right? We're not that involved to know. We kind of let the courts figure it out. But that was really a situation where we were starting to see a lot of these red flags, and we just had to put a temporary hold until we figured out what the situation was. And at the end of the day, our job is to cater to the client, right? The client is the ultimate, is our client, right? And whatever they wish to do is what they wish to do, right? We're not serving the POAs, we're not serving these friends and neighbors. Our focus is going to be on the client and what their wishes are. So we talked about an estate checklist. Now, as all of you probably know, there's a never-ending list of stuff, right, that we have to keep on top of, whether it's, your strata payments, your utility bills, your auto insurance, your life insurance, your various bank accounts and credit cards, and don't even get me started on, your online accounts. So you've got your Netflix, you've got your Gmail. So there's just so much stuff, right? And accounts that we now have. Who's your POA? Where's your will located? Who are your accountants and lawyers and financial advisors? So, to put everything into one place, would do a huge favor to your executor or whoever's taking over, when you pass away, right? It just saves them many, many, many hours of digging and trying to find passwords. And so we do have something on our website called the Estate Planning Inventory. So they're going to circulate a helpful resources, and it's going to have a link to our blog post that has a place to download that checklist. It does take several hours to complete. It's not really a fun exercise, let's be honest, but I think it's incredibly important, and we're all going to go one day, right? So the more that you can help out your next generation, they're gonna very much appreciate it. So that's the end of the first section. Ashton, are there any questions so far? Or...
Hi, Cindy. Yeah, we had one a bit earlier on. Natasha had asked if you're married, do you need an enduring power of attorney?
Yes, that's a good question. So, yes, you should still have a power of attorney, just to highlight who you want to make those decisions. It could be your husband or wife, it could be your children. So, definitely just a good thing to have, um, regardless of your marital status. Are not in place. How hard is it going forward to make all financial decisions on her behalf, as I have been for years? If you do, well, if she loses capacity, it's going to be much harder, right? So it's going to be easy on the accounts where you're joint, because it's you're technically an owner of the account. But for, let's say, she loses capacity or passes away, and you don't have that enduring power of attorney, you may not be able to. Your hands may be tied, right? So it's definitely in your best interest to get one set up. Yes, you can download the estate checklist and print it off. And yeah, okay, I think that's all we have so far. So yeah, keep those questions coming. That's great. So now let's shift to asset allocation, right? Let's talk more about investments. Asset allocation, also known as asset mix. You'll hear this terminology a lot with your financial advisor. So asset allocation or asset mix is very, very important. So over 90% of your long-term returns are really driven by asset mix, right? There's a small percentage here of individual stock selection, very, very small percentage, 2% to market timing, which we don't really recommend. But the vast majority is driven by your asset mix in the portfolio, which is why when you go to meet with your financial advisor in the beginning, they'll go through all of those risk tolerance questionnaire questions, and determine how much risk you can handle. And there's a lot of other considerations that come into play, right? So things like, do you need cash flow from the portfolio? What are you trying to do with this money? What are your investment goals? How much time do you have for this money, right? And there's a few, so basically it paints an overall picture. And then from there, they can say, okay, well, given that, we recommend, let's say, I don't know, a 70% equity or stock portfolio with the other 30% in fixed income and cash, right? So this is very, very important. And it is a main driver of risk and return in your investment portfolio. So when I say risk return, what do I mean by that? There's, as you know, a trade-off. There's no free lunch, right? So the more risk that you're willing to take, the more your potential expected returns for any asset class. So if we start here in the most bottom left corner, cash is going to be the lowest risk, lowest return. Although more recently with the higher interest rates, we've actually been seeing a pretty reasonable return from cash and GICs. A little bit less so now with some of the rate cuts that we've gotten from the Bank of Canada. As you step up that risk spectrum, you've got government bonds. We've also got some company bonds, and of course, company bonds are going to be more risky than government bonds, right? Because companies are technically less likely to be able to. Well, they're less able. Well, there's a greater risk that they may not be able to pay back their bondholders, a greater risk than the government, right, which has never defaulted on a bond. There's also high yield bonds where you start getting into lower quality companies, right? And then somewhere in the middle of that risk spectrum is real estate, infrastructure, right? The direct holdings in hard assets. Then you've got your equities or stocks, right? So you've got your Canadian, US, international stocks. Of course, your more developed regions of the world, more developed companies are going to be less risky than the more underdeveloped regions, smaller companies, right? So there's definitely a wide spectrum as well within stocks. And then the highest risk, highest potential return would be private equity, direct investments in any businesses. So let's say your son comes to you and asks for a $50,000 loan to put into his business. Are you going to get that money back? Maybe, right? Maybe very successful, but it's definitely going to be much more high risk than a liquid, well capitalized company on the stock exchange, right? So that kind of gives you, a pretty good idea of where that all sits in terms of asset classes and what asset mix is appropriate for you, right? And it really varies by people, and it depends on so many different factors. But if we look at the highest risk, if we go into 100% stocks or 100% equities, yes, you can have the highest long-term expected return. So we just use about 8% per year here. But in a bad year, as we've seen before, 07, 08, during COVID, even in 2022, there's years where you may potentially lose 20% of your investment in any given year, right? So whereas if you were to go into a very conservative portfolio of all bonds in cash, your expected returns are going to be much lower. But then again, that potential downside is going to be much more contained as well. But I would say the majority of people kind of fall somewhere kind of here of my clients. I would say you need equities to generate the growth in your portfolio. And bonds are really a source of income, stability. It allows the advisor, if equities sell off or go down in value, for them to sell some bonds for you, to be able to buy some equities and rebalance when prices are low. So, just trying to figure out what level of volatility you can handle and go to sleep at night. If your portfolio is down, and how does that align with your goals for the portfolio? Is it going to be able to generate the returns that you need, right? So yeah, it's just, and that's part of the dialogue with your advisor to figure out where you fall on this table here. And does this asset mix change over time? All right, it is definitely not static. So some factors to consider would be your personal risk tolerance, right? So some clients could care less if markets are down 30, 40%, right? They can sleep perfectly fine at night. They know in the long term your equity markets are going to do well, and it's going to come back. It may take some while to come back, but they don't lose any sleep over it, right? Whereas some people, they lose a bit of money and they call me right away and say, okay, I can't handle it, right? So and that changes sometimes with experience, right? If you're, a longer term investor, you've seen various market cycles, you may be less sensitive to that. Employment status, right? So if you've got a job, right, you're going to be more stable, you're going to be able to put more money aside to invest. If you lose your job, well, then you probably don't want to take too much risk with your investment portfolio, right? If you're in a higher income, very high income job, that's even more of a cushion, right? Versus somebody who's barely able to cover their expenses with their earnings. So that's going to be an important factor. Income needs, right? How much do you need to take money out of the portfolio to cover your spending? Do you not need to touch that money till retirement, right? So that all will vary. Net worth is another big one. So let's say somebody with a $2 million net worth versus somebody with a $100,000 net worth, that $2 million net worth individual is going to be they're able to take more risk. They may not want to take more risk, but they're going to have more of a buffer on a rainy day in the event of bad markets, if they lose their job, than somebody maybe who only has $100,000 and all of a sudden, they need to fix their roof. I don't know. Right. So net worth is important. Investment objectives, right? What are you trying to do with this money? Are you just trying to save for retirement to provide for your living when you're in your 60s, 70s, 80s? Are you hoping to leave everything to your children? Do you want to give to charity? What do you want to do with that money? And that'll be a really important criteria as well. And then time horizon, right? So the longer, generally as a rule of thumb, the more time you have to invest, the more risk you're able to take. If you need that money in a year for whatever reason, you probably can't afford to take that much equity risk, because if markets are down that year, that money won't be available to you, right? So the longer time horizon you have, the more risk you can take. And then, of course, any significant life events. So if you get married, if you get divorced, if you have a kid, retire, buy a house. I do find for my clients in their 30s and 40s, we see a lot of significant life events. So generally they get married, they have kids, buy a house, right? They change jobs a couple times. Whereas with my retiree clients, it's very different, right? They retire, right? That's a big life event. And then, they travel, they have fun with the money, and then they lose their spouse, right? That tends to be the other big life event. So you see far fewer big life events with your retirees for sure. But usually when that happens, where you see a big change in any of these items here, we do want to revisit your investment policy statement to say, okay, is your asset mix still appropriate, right? Maybe there's too much risk. Maybe there's not enough risk, right? An example of that would be a client that I have in her 70s. Um, she was depending on her portfolio to cover her cash flows and her spending. And then her husband, who was quite a bit older than her, passed away. And then all of a sudden, she starts receiving all of his Social Security from the US, all of his RIF money, all of his income. And now she's like, I don't even know what to do with all this money. I'm getting so much income. I don't need to take money from my investment portfolio anymore. Now my intention is to just let that grow for my kids, right? And then we were able to actually dial up the risk because she doesn't need to touch that money for quite some time, given, the passing of her husband. So, it is very individualized and very, very specific to the person. Okay, that's it for asset allocation. I hope that was pretty straightforward. I don't see any questions yet, so I will keep going. So I thought I would do two case studies here of client situations, and kind of gives you an idea of kind of some of the considerations that you should be thinking about, as you're talking with your financial advisor. So first case here is a mom named Sharon. She's in her early 70s. So she's got a son named Brad who's in his 40s. And Sharon has developed late stage dementia. Now, the real Brad in real life, that's obviously not his name. He is probably one of the most doting, amazing sons I've ever seen, right? So he takes care of his mom. He basically bathes her. He really is her full-time caretaker. And that's, probably a lot more than, a man in his 40s is willing to do for his mother, right? So it's really quite incredible. He's really a great person. So Sharon has some investments with us. So she's got a non-registered account, which is a fully taxable account, about 50,000. She's got a registered retirement income fund, so RIF. For those of you that don't know, most people know what a RRSP is, right? It's your registered retirement savings plan. Is that so your RSP, you're basically adding throughout your lifetime to save for retirement, right? When you get to the point where you want to start taking money out of that RSP, you have to convert it to something called this RIF, right? And once you convert it to a RIF, you can't put any more money into it. You have to start taking money out and spending it, right? The government's saying, okay, you have to start spending it now that you're in retirement. So the earliest you can convert that is 55, and the latest that you can convert it is the end of the year that you turn 71, right? So she's already converted, and she's got a RIF account of about $215,000, and then she's got a tax-free savings account of about 80,000. So she doesn't have her husband; he's passed away, and while she still had capacity, she updated her will and also her power of attorney while she still had capacity, which is great, right? So she changed that all to Brad. So what are some of the changes here that are going to dictate her asset allocation? So she lives with frontotemporal dementia, and the doctor has written a doctor's note saying that her life expectancy has now been reduced to less than 10 years. So in this situation, her time horizon has now shortened, right? So as we just talked about, that's usually a sign that we should be taking some risk off the table, reducing some of the equities in her portfolio. And her situation has now worsened, right? She was living with Brad at home. He was taking care of her. But now she needs to move into specialized care and move into a private care home, which is obviously going to cost more money than living at home with Brad, right? So she's going to start needing to take more money out of the portfolio to cover these costs. So higher income needs, reduce risk, right? So things are all pointing towards taking some risk off the table. Sharon used to be quite involved and want to look at her statements, but now she's developed a huge distrust of people who are managing her money. Brad tells her that her funds are being managed very conservatively, but she doesn't understand. So that grasping has definitely gone down. So her risk tolerance has gone down, right? She can't handle seeing loss of money, right, in her portfolio. So again, another sign to reduce some risk. And Sharon is currently collecting several sources of income. So she's collecting her Canada pension plan, her old age security. We'll talk more about these. She was previously a nurse when she was employed. So she gets a nice municipal pension plan. And then she's also taking money out of her RIF account, right? So all of these sources of income are taxable income. So what could potentially happen here? So the first outcome is that Sharon lives longer than we expect, right? The doctor said 10 years. Maybe she's in great health and she lives till 20, 25 years, right? And the risk of that happening is that she may deplete her investment portfolio in her lifetime. As you saw, she had about $350,000 in investments. Living in Vancouver, that's not a huge amount of money to last you that long, right? So that's definitely a risk that she's going to outlive her savings. So now what's happened is that if that happens, Brad's going to have the responsibility of having to cover all of her expenses on top of all of those benefits that we talked about in her pension, right? Fortunately, in this situation, the real Brad actually has a pretty sizable investment portfolio himself. So he's happy and capable of doing that. But that's certainly not always going to be the case, right? So that could be quite a bad situation if Brad was not in a good financial position. Because Sharon is collecting that municipal pension plan, she may not be eligible for some of these additional benefits like the guaranteed income supplements. So that's a potential outcome. The second scenario is that Sharon may pass away sooner than we think, right? Maybe she passes away next year. And then the risk of that is she's going to leave a large RIF portfolio. So I don't think a lot of Canadians know this, but if you pass away with a large RSP or a RIF portfolio, it doesn't even have to be large, but basically, let's say she passes away next week, right? So she's got this $215,000 RIF portfolio. In the year that she dies, the government is going to view the entire value of that RIF portfolio as income in the year of her death. So in addition to, her CPP, OAS, pension, let's say it's $80,000 a year, she's also going to now have this $215,000 of income in the year of her death, right? And as we know, the government may take up to 50% of that, right? So one of the big risks of seniors passing away with large RSPs and RIFs, specifically the ones without a spouse or a common law partner, is that it's going to be taxed by the government, and you may lose potentially up to half of the value of that. So definitely something to be aware of. I have some clients with very, very large RIF portfolios, over $1 million. And one of the things that we do talk to them about is, okay, maybe we want to start melting that down a little bit earlier, right? So you don't end up with a huge tax bill. So we talked about this, fully taxable as income in the year of death. If she were to die next week, over $100,000 of that would probably end up going to taxes, which is going to end up being less inheritance for Brad, right, and the family. So what can she do here in this situation? So the first things first, we want to take down some of the portfolio risk, right? We want to take down some equities, add more fixed income, add more cash. Because now she's got a higher reliance on the income generated by the portfolio. She can no longer handle a lot of fluctuations or volatility, right? Another word that you hear, right? We're going to need that reliability in the portfolio to be able to pay for, all of her spending and her care home costs. In terms of where we want to pull money from in the portfolio, we probably want to prioritize her RIF account and also her non-registered account. And then we just want to leave the tax-free savings account to just grow. The tax-free savings account is really our only vehicle as Canadians that's totally tax-free. And so we just want to let that grow and not really touch that when we can, but prioritize the RIF and non-registered. And you may be asking me, well, why wouldn't you just take everything from a RIF, right? You don't want her to pass away and have this huge RIF, and that's going to be a big tax liability. Yes, that is true, but it's a bit of a balancing act, right? Because RIF income that you take out is fully taxable, right? Fully taxable income. And I mentioned that Sharon is drawing out she's collecting old age security, right? So with old age security, there's something called old age security clawback. And what that means is if you start earning too much income, the government's going to take back some of those old age security benefits, right? And for the mid 2024 to kind of mid 2025 period, the government has mandated, okay, if you make $91,000, we're going to start clawing back some of that old age security, right? And it goes up on a percentage basis. But if she ends up making more than $148,000 in any given year, she's going to completely lose her OAS benefits, right? And these numbers go up every year with inflation. You can check it out on the CRA website, but definitely something to be aware of, right? If she were to just say, oh, okay, I want to take out my entire RIF portfolio next year, that's $215,000 of income. She's going to completely lose her OAS and also be hit with a big tax bill, right? So really just want to find that balancing act. Another caveat is that her care home costs are also based on her income. So it's a government one, right? So the more income that she makes, the more her monthly expenses are for living in this care home, right? So it's a bit of a catch-22. But so we want to be mindful not to pull out too much RIF income that we put her at the highest amount of care home expenses. Nice thing about the TFSA, the tax-free savings account, those assets go directly tax-free to her son or her beneficiary. Oh, thank you for pointing out a lot of financial jargon. I'll try to slow down. And then her non-registered assets. So this is again her taxable portfolio. All of those assets will go into her estate when she passes away, right? So anything that's not an RSP or TFSA or anything registered would actually go into your estate upon death, and anything within your estate is going to be subject to probate, right? And probate is the fee that the province will take to be able to process all of your estate value. So it's different by province, but in BC, that value is 1.4% probate. And there's different ways that you can get around that, but if you don't have a trust set up, if you have a lot of non-registered assets, you are going to be paying that 1.4%. And then finally, she's going to add a trusted contact person on file. That's not her power of attorney, who is Brad. And that's going to be good for her to just make sure that she has that trusted contact person on file with her advisor. Okay, so I'm just going to stop for a minute. I'm getting some feedback that I need to slow down. So thank you for that feedback. I'm going to leave that up there for just a moment while I address some of these questions here. what do you mean by market timing 2% in the investment portfolio? So what I mean by that is if you're making, market timing calls, meaning that you think, okay, I think the market's going to go down, so let me sell my stocks and try to buy back when, when stocks go down 10, 20%. That's trying to time the market, right? You're not just trying to be invested, you're trying to make calls on where you think the market is going to go. So that only impacts your returns by 2%, whereas your asset allocation will drive over 90% of your long-term returns. How is a RIF handled when the spouse who is the beneficiary of the person passes away? Is that taxed? Okay, that's a good question. So if you have a RIF or an RRSP account and you are married or have a common law partner, the beauty of it is that it actually goes, it basically becomes their RSP, their RIF, right? And this is only available for a spouse or a common law partner. So with a RIF specifically, you can designate what's called, the terminology they call it is successor annuitant, which is basically just to say, this is my spouse, they are the beneficiary, and upon my passing, I want this RIF to basically become their RIF, and then they can start drawing that income, right? So yeah, you kind of have a bit more of a cushion if you have a partner or a spouse, because it's not going to be taxed until the last spouse passes away. Hopefully that answers your question there, Janelle. If you name a beneficiary for the non-registered funds, is there still probate fee? So good question. So there is no beneficiary at all for non-registered accounts, right? You don't have that option. It'll just go directly into your estate upon death. So yes, there is still probate fee.
Cindy, I just had a question that came to me as a direct message, I think by accident,
Sure.
but someone was just wondering, what are non-registered assets?
Yeah, really good question. So we have so you have different account vehicles that you can invest in, right? So we talked about the tax-free savings account, the RRSP, the registered retirement savings plan. There's a lot of different types of registered accounts out there. There's different pros and cons to using all of those. There's, RESP, which is an education savings account for your children. There's RDSP, registered disability savings plan. So if there's anything, if you're trying to invest in a vehicle that's not one of the registered accounts, you have to open a non-registered account. So it's just an open cash account. Basically, it's a fully taxable account, right? The other accounts that I talked about that are registered usually have some sort of tax deferral, tax savings. Whereas this non-registered account, if you earn any, let's say you buy some stocks, they pay dividend income, you're paying tax on that. If you hold bonds, they also pay income, you're also paying tax on that. If you sell an investment and it's made money, it's got a capital gain, you're paying tax on that. All the different tax rates are different, but everything in that account will be fully taxable. So it's kind of the last, not the last resort, but if you aren't using the other accounts, then a non-registered account would be the one that you use. I assume that if there are joint accounts, in that case, there would be no probate fee. Yeah, another great question. So a lot of people will do joint accounts with their spouse. So let's say, Matt and Mary, right? They have a joint non-registered account. And what happens is, let's say, Mary passes away, it'll just roll to the spouse. Their name basically just drops off the account. There's no tax implication. It just basically becomes the other person's non-registered account, right? So that happens very frequently. And from an estate planning perspective, it makes a lot of sense if you've got a spouse. It's easiest with a spouse to do a joint non-registered account. Some people try to do joint accounts with their children. You can do that, but then it starts getting a little bit messy from a taxation perspective. What is the RDSP fund? Is that different than the tax-free account? Yes. So the tax-free savings account is eligible to, there's a few criteria, but if you're 18 years or older, if you're a Canadian and you've been in Canada for whatever number of years, assuming you've been in Canada this whole time and you weren't 18 in any of the last, few decades, you would have $95,000 of room to invest in your tax-free savings account, right? And every year the government will give you a little bit more room to every Canadian. So let's say next year they give you $7,000, right? And then you'd have $102,000 that you could put into your tax-free savings account. And everybody should actually have a tax-free savings account if they have the money to invest, because it is totally tax-free, right? If you get income in there, if you have capital gains and growth in that portfolio, it comes to you completely tax-free, right? So definitely a useful vehicle. And what is the RDSP fund? That's the Registered Disability Savings Plan. So if you meet the criteria of the government, there's definitely some grants and benefits to saving in a or investing in an RDSP plan. And again, that's also tax deferred. So there's some tax benefits with that as well. But you have to qualify, right? You have to meet that disability criteria. Okay. So if do you have to have employment income to put money into a TFSA? You do not. You do not. Assuming you meet the criteria of the number of years you've been Canadian over 18, you would have that room. Where you find that room for you individually is through the CRA website. So if you create an account with the CRA website, you'll see there pretty much on the main page, your TFSA contribution room in 2024 is X dollars, right? Employment income is going to be more of a factor for your RRSP, right? Because you can only put so much into your RRSP based on how much income you made in the prior year. Benefit of the RRSP for those interested is that it's a tax deduction, right? So let's say you made $80,000 of income last year. Let's say you put in $5,000 into your RRSP, it'll be like you were only made $75,000 of income. So you usually get a bit of money back from the government. As a grandparent, could I invest in my grandchildren's RESP, which is a registered education savings plan? Yes, you can. You certainly can. And again, that one is just for savings for your child. If you put in, $2,500 a year up to a lifetime maximum of $50,000 each year, the government will match you a percentage of that. So I just had a son a year and a half ago. So I've done his RESP for 2 years now. And each year the government gives me $500 of a grant. I put in $2,500. And then that also grows on a tax deferred basis. So it's a great vehicle to save for your children's education. And you can also do a family plan, right? A family RESP. So it can apply to multiple children if one doesn't go to post-secondary or trade school. Getting a little off topic, but I think these are all really great questions. And I think if people are interested in more of like an investment basics seminar, I'm happy to do that as well. Okay, can you set up an investment account like a TFSA for your grandchild as a surprise gift, or do they have to be with you at the time of opening? Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends on, you have to be 18 or older to have a TFSA, and you need things like their SIN number, social insurance number to be able to open one. You probably just want to speak to the parents first to make sure that they don't already have one, because there's definitely risks of over contributing, right, to their TFSA. And if you put more money than the government allows you to, they'll ding you with some interest. So you just want to make sure to communicate with their parents and say, hey, maybe instead of doing it for them, just giving them the cash to invest in their TFSA. That's what I would recommend. RESP, no tax deduction. Nice thing is, kids can pull it out. Some of the money that they take out in the future may be taxable when they go to school, but it's taxable when they're in school, right? So they're generally in a very, very low tax bracket anyway, so they don't usually end up paying any tax. Okay. All right. So I just fielded a lot of questions there. So I think we're ready to move on. Oh, this is important. Okay. So we talked a lot about RIFs, right? And again, that's going to be your when you start taking money out of your RRSP, you say, okay, now it's time to start taking out some income. Earliest you can convert that RRSP to an RRIF is 55, and the very latest is age 71, right? So the government each year will say, okay, so now that you've converted to an RRIF, we need you to start pulling out the minimum amount that we are outlining here in this table, right? So in Sharon's case, she's 71. So the government's saying, okay, you have to take out 5.28% of the value of your RIF each year as a minimum, right? And you have to take it out. Like there's no getting around that. There's no maximum on a RIF, so she could take out as much money as she wants. She could take out the entire portfolio, right? But we talked about how that doesn't really make sense from a tax perspective. But the nice thing is, it's flexible, right? You just have to take out that minimum. And in her case, um, the minimum on $215,000, she has to take out 5.28% at 71. So that means that she's going to have to take out $11,350 from her RIF in the following year, right? She has to take it out, again, fully taxable. If she takes out just this minimum amount, she doesn't have to pay any withholding tax, right? And you're probably asking, what is withholding tax? So if she takes out, let's say she says, I need more than $11,350. I want $20,000, right? Fine, she can absolutely do it. But any amount above that minimum, so about that $8,600 above that minimum that she wants to take out, there's going to be some withholding tax. And basically, the government's just saying, we want to take your tax money in advance, and then we can figure it out at tax time next year when you actually file your taxes. But on that 8,000 whatever dollars, she's going to have to, we're going to, as a financial institution, we have to withhold 20% and submit it directly to the CRA on her behalf. The CRA just wants their cut early, right? So just something to be aware of. And if you take more than $15,000 above the minimum, we have to withhold 30% on just the excess amount, not the full amount, right? So the idea is that as you get older, each year, the government wants you to take out more and more money, right? Because you don't want to be 90 and still have a huge RIF portfolio, right? We talked about this. So as you know, actually, and as you get into kind of your 90s, it gets up to even 20%, that you have to a mandatory withdrawal, because the idea is they want you to deplete it, right, in your lifetime. So each year the income that you're going to be taking out is going to be going up, right? So let's talk about government pensions and allowances. So there's a lot of different types of government pensions and allowances. So CPP, which is Canada Pension. So this is going to be based more on your earnings as an employee or as you're self-employed. The maximum amount that you can get in 2024 is going to be about $1,365 a month. Of course, it's going to be based on your individual track record, how much you've saved or contributed into CPP while you've been employed. Fully taxable. So one thing to note about CPP and OAS, really important point, is that you'll probably get the letter around the time you're 65, right, from the government to say, okay, do you want to start taking your CPP and your OAS, right? So you don't have to take it at 65, right? So that's kind of the ballpark starting point. With a Canada Pension Plan or the CPP, you can take it actually as early as 60, right? And you can defer it to as late as 70. So I would say, and there's one caveat to that. So if you each year that you defer past 65 for both your CPP and your OAS, you actually get quite a big percentage more in payments once you do start. Okay. So if you were to say, wait and not start at 65 and start at 70, you can actually potentially get 42% more in payments from your Canada Pension Plan and 36% more from your old age security. So there's definitely benefits to waiting to take your CPP and OAS. It's very individual. Of course, if you've got a shortened life expectancy like Sharon, you probably don't want to wait to start it. There's a calculation somewhere I saw where it was like if you think you're going to live to age 80 or further, then it probably makes sense to defer if you can. Now, obviously, some people can't wait. They need the income, right? So it's very specific to you. But with the CPP, there's the other side of it is you can actually start it as early as 60, but it goes the other way as well, right? So if you started at 60 instead of 65, you actually get 36% less in payments than if you were to start at 65. So rule of thumb, the more that you can defer until age 70, the more that you'll get in payments. And it's a pretty material increase if you can wait, right? So we talked about clawback for OAS. That's not the case with CPP. And then for OAS, in terms of what you can expect to get each month, you're kind of getting somewhere between, the maximum that you can get is somewhere between $700 to kind of $780 each year per month. Sorry. And then there's other, government pensions that, but they tend to be for lower income individuals. So I think with guaranteed income supplements, you need to make less than like $22,000 a year. And then if you're a widow, you may be eligible, and low income, you may be eligible for some allowance as well. Right, but most people don't get that because that's a fairly low threshold that they've set. I've just put this information here. We don't have to go through it. You can get a copy of the slides, but it kind of highlights exactly how much you're able to get of all these different pensions. So, second case here is a married couple named Doug and Mary, right? They're in their mid to late 60s. They're married with their daughter Jane, who's 32. And Doug, the dad, recently found out that he is diagnosed with dementia. So, in terms of their investments, they've got a joint non-registered account, right? We talked about that, valued at $1 million, and they both have individual TFSAs of $90,000. So their daughter Jane, they're quite worried because she's lived with mental health issues for many years, and she has no dependents of her own. Okay, so just to summarize the situation, they want to make sure that their daughter is taken care of if anything were to happen to them. They have concerns that Jane could not adequately manage her money if she were to just inherit the entire sum of her parents' assets today. And Doug is really the financial person in the relationship, right? He does the meetings with the financial advisor, but now that he's been diagnosed with dementia, he wants to make sure that Mary, his wife, is set up to be able to handle the finances in case anything happens to him. They have a large non-registered portfolio of $1 million, right? That's all subject to that 1.4% probate fee that we talked about. So let's talk a little bit about a trust. Where does a trust come in handy? A trust is a legal entity that holds your assets outside of your will, a will alternative, if you will, right? And there's a few characters that play a role with a trust. So you have someone called the settlor, right? This is the person who actually creates the trust and who puts the money or property into the trust. In this case, it would be Doug and Mary. The trustee is the person who the settlor chooses to basically manage the trust, right? And make sure that, the beneficiaries are protected and get what they're supposed to get. And in this case, we'll talk about this specific trust, but they're actually going to be the trustees on this particular type of trust, but they do choose a family friend as their successor trustee in the event that they both go. They have somebody that they trust. They've also assigned an alternate trustee, which is a professional firm in the event that their family friend is not able or does not want to take on this trustee role, which is, quite a bit of work. So they're well covered. And then there's the beneficiary, right? They're the ones who benefit from the money from the trust. So in this case, Doug and Mary are going to be the primary beneficiaries while they're still alive. And then their daughter is going to be a secondary beneficiary when they both pass, right? So these are the key players. So this particular trust type we're going to talk about today is called the alter ego trust and the joint partner trust, right? Very, very similar, except the alter ego trust is for one person and the joint partner trust is for spouses, okay? Or common law partners. The criteria to be able to set up one of these trusts is you must be 65 years or older. And the reason why a lot of people really like this alter ego trust is you still have a lot of control over the assets, whereas with a lot of other types of trusts, which we're not going to get into today, you lose a lot of control, right? Because really, this money is no longer your money; it's owned by the trust, right? And there's benefits and cons to that. And then you can designate a beneficiary as well after you go. Whereas a joint partner trust includes just you and your spouse common law partner. And in both cases, nobody aside from you or your spouse can receive the income and capital from this trust until everyone's passed away, right? And then after you go, you can designate whoever you want to be the beneficiary, friends, family, a charity, so on and so forth. I think the biggest draw, that the reason why we still see a lot of people setting up these two types of trusts is because you can actually move your So let's say you have that non-registered portfolio, right? That $1 million that they have. Let's say they only put in $500,000 many, many years ago, and it's grown to $1 million, right? So they've got an unrealized capital gain of $500,000 that they would have to pay tax on if they were to sell everything today, right? The benefit of these types of trusts is that you can actually move everything into these trusts from your non-registered at cost, right? So there's no, and we call this there's no deemed disposition, meaning that basically it's not a taxable event, right? You can basically move it in to this trust. The trust still shows the cost at 500,000 and the market value at $1 million, right? So there's no, I mean, the CRA is going to get their cut eventually, and that's going to be when you die, if with an alter ego trust, or if you and your spouse both die, you would then have to pay the money. There would be a deemed disposition, so you would have to pay tax on all of those capital gains, right? So, what are the advantages and disadvantages of these types of trusts? I think the biggest one for a lot of people is they don't want to have to pay probate, right? So, this is one way to avoid having to pay that 1.4% in BC. Trusts are really confidential and private, right? Wills are public information. So, just so you know, if you want something in there you don't want everybody to see, having a trust really gives you that protection. And anybody who's been an executor for their family knows that, if you don't have a trust and you just have a will and everything's in your estate, it can take a long time for your beneficiaries to get their money, right? Sometimes up to a year, maybe more. Whereas with the trust, they can get it with much less delay. We talked about the deemed disposition not happening until after they pass. And then it's less likely to be challenged in court, right? So with a will, if you make it very, very unequal, very unfair, it's it's easy to challenge a will, whereas it's probably going to be a little bit harder with a trust. And then I think the biggest one in their case is protection for incapacity, right? So making sure that Jane's taken care of. Once they're both gone, they can highlight in the trust deed exactly how they want the money to be paid out to Jane. Disadvantages. So it's definitely going to be more costly to set up a trust. You've got the legal fees associated with setting it up. It's more complex. You have to file annual tax returns, which can be a pain and expensive, right? And terms of a trust, depending on what type of trust you set up, it can be quite difficult to change the terms of it. But definitely, suitable for some individuals for sure. I'm not going to get into that. So I think in their case, a joint partner trust would be suitable because then they're able to move everything in at book cost or cost. It's going to be able to provide for Doug and Mary for the remainder of their lifetime. So they can basically live off the income they can live off the income in the portfolio, while they're alive. And then when they both pass away, then the trustee, their family friend, can distribute the funds to Jane on a monthly basis, right? And exactly as they outline. Other thing happens is Doug invites Mary to start joining him at their meetings with their financial advisor, and they update their wills, their powers of attorney, their trusted contact person. Doug is going to go through the executor checklist, so Mary has all that information handy in one place. And then the tax-free savings assets will go directly tax-free to Jane when they both pass away. Well, in this case, they have individual TFSAs. So when one dies, it would just go to whoever the beneficiary is. And that is all I had. So hopefully that was a good high level kind of introduction for you. Of course, we can get into the weeds or not. But I did see just a couple of last questions here. So maybe I'll just take a look here. Would it be a good idea to take out the maximum on a RIF each year and use that extra income to help max out your TFSA? Again, that's kind of, really dependent on the individual. Again, there's no maximum on a RIF, right? So you can take out as much as you want. But I think it would make sense if, let's say, you have a very large RIF and you want to start melting it down so you don't lose too much of your OAS, where you take a little extra. You can certainly invest it in your TFSA if there's room, assuming that you're not paying too much tax, right, by taking out extra from your RIF, because RIF income is, again, taxable income, right? Am I planning to start drawing down my RSP, paying the withholding and putting it directly? Yeah, I think, okay, so Catherine's asking, should I be converting to a RIF? I feel like I have more flexibility. So as soon as you convert it, you can also do a partial conversion to a RIF, right? So you don't have to convert the entire amount of your RSP. Some people, will do half or a smaller percentage, because that way that keeps your RSP that you can continue to make contributions and get the tax deduction. So if you're still earning good income, a high level of income, having the ability to contribute to your RSP helps you offset some of those taxes while you're still working. Um, so yeah, I think again, this is a very individual specific one that we should probably take offline. Um, can Leith Wheeler advise persons living in Canada with dual Canada US citizenship? So we do have a few clients like that, who are dual citizens, but we do have to work pretty closely with your cross-border accountant, because the taxes, as you know, can get quite complex, and there's certain investments that we can't hold. So yeah, again, that's more of an individual discussion, but we'll try to hold more individual securities for you, maybe versus mutual funds. Um, a number of people I know put an adult child on their residential property. Yeah, so if you do a joint, whether it's a non-registered account that you make joint or a home that you make joint, there you just want to make sure that you get some legal advice before you do this, because I think the key thing to note is that in the eyes of the CRA, they're going to say, well, maybe you put them on the account really just to administer the account for you, and not actually as an actual owner, So just documenting your intentions to actually gift half of the property or half of the portfolio to your child. Having that intention will save you a lot of problems come tax time, because otherwise, they may just view it as, okay, well, you just put your child on there just to be able to administer the account. So we're still going to charge you. There's still going to be, what's this deemed disposition upon your passing, right? Because they're going to view it as a way for you to get out of paying tax, right? So just be careful with that. Definitely get some legal advice. We have POAs. Do we have to change them to enduring POAs? You just want to check, that it is an enduring POA, not a general POA. It'll say in the trust deed, in the document, what type of POA it is. Can I have more than one POA? And if so, how would that work? Yeah, so you can delegate. I mean, this is getting into a bit of legal, but you can delegate, let's say you want to delegate both kids to be POAs, maybe in the same document, but they have to agree, right, on a decision, right? So that's something that you could do. You may have assets in different jurisdictions that may require different POAs. So that you may have to talk to maybe a lawyer for that one. That one's a bit more law specific. I was only referring to residential property. Okay, same thing. You just want to make sure that you outline your intentions in advance, and right, because they may just view it as a way of avoiding taxes. So just making your intentions very clear. Okay, I think I've covered all the questions. So, like I said, feel free to reach out directly to me. I'm happy to have a call or just email with specific questions. But aside from that, I want to thank you all so much for joining today, and yeah, welcome questions in the future as well.
Finish off our presentation. So thank you again, Cindy, for your time today. So wonderful to have you, and thank you for answering all the questions. I know this can definitely stir up a lot of different questions. Everyone's situations are so unique, so we really appreciate you being here and just answering those and giving us so much great information. So I just want to finish off our presentation by reminding everyone that we do have a feedback survey. I've popped that link into the chat box a couple of times. So please feel free to fill that out. We so appreciate your feedback every week. Really helps us determine what we can improve on, or even what topics we can present on in the future. And in terms of staying connected with us at the Alzheimer's Society, we always have our programs available. We offer one-to-one support over the phone. We do support groups, our Minds in Motion program, which is a fitness and social program, both online and in person. And then, of course, we also have our First Link Dementia Helpline. And I put the link and information to that a few times in the chat box, and now I've got it up on the screen. So you can always feel free to call us about any sorts of questions or support that you need in terms of your situation, whether you're a caregiver of someone living with dementia or just have questions. regarding dementia. Maybe you're living with dementia yourself. We'd be happy to speak with you. And each week we do our webinars like this on Wednesdays, so please stay tuned for future ones. This was being recorded, so we will have this up on our website in about a week if you would like to share with anyone or revisit the content. So we do these webinars weekly as lectures. We also do online workshops that are a bit more interactive. So webinars and workshops available. We also do in-person education. So just wanted to touch on our programs there. And I will also share that we do have our Yukon Dementia Helpline as well. We're very pleased to be supporting people in the Yukon now. So that is the number. It's also available on our website at allsbc.org/Yukon if you'd like to check that out. And you can also email us at info.yukondhl@alzheimerbc.org. So with that, I'll just finish off by putting up our dementia helpline slide. Again, it is available in other languages as well, such as Punjabi, Hindi, Urdu, Cantonese, and Mandarin. So all the information is there, and I'll just leave that up. And thank you so much again, Cindy, for the wonderful presentation today and for taking the time to do this. And yeah, like we said, feel free to reach out to either us through the Dementia Helpline. Cindy's contact info is in the helpful resources there. So we hope to see you again at one of our future webinars. And otherwise, take good care, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the day.